Book 4, Falcon in the Barn, Chapter 33. The quieter you both are, the faster all of this will just go away. Mari had been expecting the knock on the door in the morning. Mr. Hegick smiled painfully, apologetically, when she opened it. "Mrs. Shin, I'm so sorry to have to do this, but I was told that I needed to—" He stopped because Mari was already handing him a sheath of papers. With a kind smile, she said, "Last night I made complete records about each student, for whomever will be filling in for me during the last few weeks of school. I wasn't about to get much sleep anyway. I wish you guidance from the Creator, whom I still believe in, Mr. Hegick. You're going to need all the help you can get." Mr. Hegick shook his head, his tiny green eyes looking lost and pitiful. "Oh, Mrs. Shin, I feel so awful about this. There's so much I want to say." Perrin appeared behind her. "But you'd be safer to say nothing," he warned. "Colonel, Mr. Shin." Mr. Hegick closed his eyes briefly before saying, with as much warmth as possible, "Thank you for everything over the years. Thank you." He tried to convey so much in those few words, and Mari felt it all. She blinked back tears and nodded to him, as did Perrin. Mr. Hegick nodded back and left with Mari's notes. Perrin closed the door. "Well, that wasn't so hard, was it?" He was already wearing the dinner smile. Mari shrugged. "So why do I feel like I just was kicked out of school?" "Well, then, let's sit down at the table and consider the effect of our behavior upon our peers." Perrin did his best Mr. Hegick impersonation. Mari smiled, almost as good as Lannard. I think I might actually miss those boys." "It's just for a little while, Mari. Give this some time and everything will calm down. Hegick will be here by the beginning of harvest season, begging you to return. No one else will put up with those boys." "Maybe we should have kept Pato home this morning," she worried. "This is all about you and me, remember? Not him. He needs a distraction anyway. I don't think he knows what to think right now." "That makes 3 of us then, right?" He pursed his lips. "Now what?" Mari sighed. Go back upstairs and laze around in bed for the rest of the morning?" He smiled sadly until another knock surprised them both. Hesitantly, Perrin opened the door. Rector Young stood there with his usual cheerful smile. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Shin." A movement on the road caught Perrin's eye. "Young, you're a brave man. As much as I'd like to talk to you, 2 soldiers have just arrived at the end of the road and are watching. Perhaps you should just leave. I'd hate for anything—" Rector Young held up his hand. "And another one followed me here. I care nothing for what they can do to me. If I meet the Creator today or in 5 years, it doesn't matter, as long as I complete his errands. I have one more to do today. Shin family, I'm here to bid you farewell." "What?" Mari exclaimed. "Where are you going?" "It seems my rectory is needed more by the administrators than by the citizens of Edge. And since the writings have been declared to be mythology and nothing more, there's no longer a need for holy day services," he said with a pained smile. "No!" Mari cried. Perrin shook his head in disbelief. "They're just stopping everything and taking it from you?" "Apparently, I haven't paid certain taxes over the years," Young said, "although my records, which they've confiscated, say otherwise. So the administrators, in their generous manner, instead of incarcerating me, are allowing me to go on my way, provided I hand over the property." Mari sighed. "This is about us last night, isn't it? Perrin told me what you did for us. You were so brave, and now this is your reward? I'm so sorry." Rector Young held up his hand again. "Not at all. Rectories all over the world are being closed. Besides, my main work here is finished, except for one last thing. Perrin, Mari. It must have been serious. He'd never before called them by their first names. Become very, very quiet, he whispered. He stared intently into each of their eyes to see if they received the message. Mari smiled sadly. Rector Young, if there's one thing I want to do now, it's to never make another peep in this village again. He smiled back. I didn't mean it as an admonition, Mari, but as a recommendation for the future. The quieter you both are, the faster all of this will just go away. The way that he said those last two words added an extra meaning which neither she nor Perrin could quite discern, but they nodded anyway. Suddenly brighter, Young said, Would you please give Pato and the Brighters my best wishes? I think this is the only stop I dare make on my way out of Edge. This is just wrong, Perrin said. Where will you go? I have many friends, a few in the same situation as me now. We'll keep ourselves occupied, I have no doubt. And I also have no doubt we will meet again. This is only temporary, I'm sure. Please be careful. Mari squeezed Young's arm. Of course, he nodded to them. You too. I best be going now. The soldiers get bored easily. Again, there was another level of meaning, and that time Mari caught on to all he recommended, as did her husband. Go quiet, bore the soldiers, and they'll go away. Wait, Perrin said, looking around him. You don't have any bags with you. I've never been one for many possessions, he assured them, and there's nothing from the world that I want to take with me anyway. The aides to the administrators took my copy of the writings, as I suspect they'll take others. Another hint. And recently, my chair broke, so there's really nothing left. Until we meet again, Shins. He trotted down the stairs, whistling cheerfully, and headed east. Perrin closed the door again. Unbelievable. Are we even in Edge anymore? Mari wiped her eyes. He seems to think it's all temporary as well. That's what we have to hope for, that none of this is forever. We need a distraction, she decided. So what do we do next? Hide our copy of the writings, then get to work here, she suggested. Perrin looked around. Plenty of things around here I've been neglecting. I'll start with the front door here. Feels a little tight. Make me a list, and I'll get this house in shape. And I'll get to the washing, Mari agreed. It was the strangest of mornings. Mari felt the rhythm of their life had abruptly shifted, as if they no longer knew how to do anything correctly or at the right time. She should have been at school, he at the fort. They might as well have had breakfast for dinner, sitting on their front porch, wearing their bedclothes while loudly singing Harvest Day songs and snorting like pigs at their neighbors. Instead, they shared stiff smiles as they passed each other, while they half-heartedly completed chores that should have been done on other days. By late morning, Perrin was in the back garden sanding the new cradle he was working on for the baby. Well, perhaps calling it a cradle was a bit of a stretch. Since it was a Perrin-Shin creation, that meant that there was nothing dainty or impractical about it. It was a baby bed that could withstand a land tremor, strong enough to bring down the house around it, while keeping its occupant secure within its barred sides. Mari had never seen a cradle made of full timbers before, but having watched the construction of her bed many years ago, she was not surprised to see what wood Perrin requisitioned for his grandchild. Jatesy wasn't surprised either, but Deck had stared at the timbers and design in bafflement. Perhaps he fretted about the disposition of his new baby, considering that Perrin felt that it required a miniature incarceration chamber. But he knew his father-in-law well enough to not ask. It was sturdy enough to even contain Pato. Perrin had tested that aspect for an hour one evening with his reluctant son before he began sanding it to make sure tiny fingers received no splinters. Through the small washroom window, Mari watched him as she wrung out the clothes in the sink. Several times he looked toward Fort Shin, his jaw shifting, his eyes scanning the alleyway. Then he looked down at the cradle, smiled feebly at it, and continued sanding the beefy bars. She sighed. Maybe if they'd had time to prepare, if they could have planned for the change, they wouldn't have left so many loose ends at the fort and the school that others needed to tie up. But Perrin's resignation was the right decision. They'd spent half the night discussing it, and both felt a release of pressure and weight. But now she would have appreciated a little of that weight back. She felt as if they were floating aimlessly, tied to nothing, and not knowing where they would end up. Mari smiled as the cat rubbed up against Perrin's leg. He bent down to scratch his ears for a moment before staring at the dirt. She remembered once when Pato became separated from her at the market when he was 3. When she finally found him, he wasn't panicked or crying, just a little sad. There was a hint of that look in Perrin's eyes today. "Dear Creator," she whispered, "what can he do now? The fort was such a large part of his life. Please help him find his way. Help him find a new purpose. And please help us get out of this mess I created." By midday meal, Perrin had finished the cradle and shored up the wobbly fence posts. He absent-mindedly ate his food, but a few times he sent the dinner smile to Mari. "This is nice, isn't it?" he said, not believing a word of it. "It certainly is," Mari agreed with just as much conviction. "I'm sure Dad could use some help this afternoon," she hinted. He nodded. "I thought of that. The cattle should be in the pasture by now, so they won't stampede at the sight of me. He had some leaks in the barn roof I could take care of. Always wanted to be a builder, right? Today's my day to see if that's my new calling." Mari nodded back. "When do you think Shem's due back?" Perrin sighed. 3 weeks he has off. No way Thorne would let him stay now. Much easier for him to do whatever he's planning without Zenas breathing down his neck. It was what the young captain might be planning that had Mari concerned. "Do you think Shem could get us a message to tell us what's happening?" "How? He's not going to know what's going on." "Perrin, I'm worried. I know you said probably nothing is coming at us, but I wish I knew it for sure. Maybe we could send a message to Karna or Jordan or Fod." "How?" Perrin said again. "Any mail I send by the regular messengers will undoubtedly be checked. I don't have any soldiers at my disposal anymore. I don't even have Clark. He's in the stables of the fort. I don't dare go up there to retrieve him, and I'm not entirely sure if he's my horse or the fort's." "Maybe the other commanders will send us a message." Perrin bobbed his head. "Once they hear about what happened, I imagine we may get something. Probably opened and read. We should lie low and quiet, as Young suggested, and be model citizens. Then we'll see what's next. All right?" She nodded miserably. He stood up, leaned over the table, and kissed her. "It will get better, I promise." She sat up tall and produced her fearless face, which she'd become good at pulling out over the years. "I'm married to the most wonderful man in the world. How could my life be any better?" He straightened up and studied her. "Have I ever told you that you are the perfect woman, and that I love and adore you more than words can express?" She grinned. "Yes, you have. Every day." He kissed her again. "I'll be home by dinner. I can promise that." Perrin hopped over the fence into the alley. "I'm going over to my son-in-law's house," he said loudly, "to work on his barn. I'll be home by dinner. I'm sure the soldier hiding in his foliage will keep a good enough watch on me. You have my permission to take a nap." "Thank you, sir," the voice in the tree above him said. It was followed by a groan and the sound of a hand smacking a forehead. Perrin chuckled as he walked down the alley. "And later," he murmured to himself, "I think I'll learn how to chop down some trees. The woodpile's looking a little low." He turned from the alley onto the main road that led to the fort. For a moment he considered trying not to see it, although once he passed the last row of houses, nothing else would be in his view other than decadent Jates's place. But as soon as he stepped on the road, he analyzed the fort objectively. It was made of wood. It had walls, and soldiers, and horses, weapons, paperwork, supply lists, regulations, duty rosters, training schedules, messages from Idemia, reports, more reports, reports of reports, and none of it, absolutely none of it, was his responsibility. A smile crept around his mouth. He let it grow. Not his responsibility. He chuckled. That was quite a liberating feeling. He took in a deep breath and smelled, perhaps for the first time ever, the dirt of Deck's farm as he approached it. Every morning for the past 19 years, at this point in his walk to the fort, he'd been mentally listing his duties for the day. He couldn't remember if he'd ever actually smelled the dark earth before. It was welcoming, interesting, new, something for him to explore. Explore. The word sat in his mind, rapidly growing until it filled every crevice. Exciting possibilities grew with it. Explore. His fantasy was interrupted by a group of 6 soldiers approaching him on their way into the village. The first test, he thought. Feeling a familiar twitch in his arm, he knew he'd be fighting for a long time. He shoved his saluting hand into his trousers pocket. As the soldiers neared, they recognized the man in the rough spun brown shirt and worn black trousers. 3 automatically saluted. 2 others began, but then stopped, their arms bouncing absurdly up and down near their foreheads, unsure of what to do next. The last soldier merely nodded and bit his lip. Perrin nodded back. "Gentlemen, good day," he said genially as they passed. His right arm flinched, desperately wanting to salute back. He did, however, allow his index finger to do a miniature salute in the safety of his pocket. This was going to be harder than he thought. Another group of soldiers now came his way, at least a dozen. Several of them recognized him, and their eyes flashed in alarm. I should get a hat, Perrin considered. Something straw or felt with a wide brim like Deckett's, that shields my face from the sun. Maybe let my hair grow out a bit. No need to keep it above my ears and collar anymore. Could even try growing a beard for once. Mari would probably hate it, though. 2 soldiers stopped in their tracks, looking at each other in concern. Another broke off from the group and went across the road, and 2 more followed him, averting their eyes so as not to see their former colonel. The rest continued in their walk to him, some still not recognizing who he was. Perrin kept his hand firmly planted in his trousers. Fortunately, the dirt drive to Deck's was coming up. He raised his left hand in a wave to the approaching soldiers, and then cut abruptly through Deck's field. Perrin strolled to the brighter home. The fort was out of his view, as well as everything else attached to it. All that filled his sight now was the house, the fields, and the barn that he'd work on this afternoon. He could leave everything else behind, as simply as that. Just change his pace, find a new target, and head toward it. This wasn't going to be so hard. A voice from the group of soldiers trailed after him. "Sir, goodbye, and thank you, sir, for everything." It was John Offra. The brighter house in front of Perrin became blurry, and he felt the need to clear his throat. He sniffed and slowed in his gait for just a moment, but he didn't turn around. He couldn't. This was going to be harder than he thought. Hugh Gleese paced back and forth in his office, while the man in green and brown clothing stood by patiently. I don't believe it. He resigned, the elderly man whispered in amazement. Just up and resigned. The man in model clothing cleared his throat. Rumor is he was to have been the new high general. Glees stopped and pivoted. His mouth was open, his eyes shiny, and his breathing paused. That's it, then, isn't it? The confirmation. The highest rank. He whispered the last words and looked up at the planked ceiling. This is it. The man smiled. We thought you'd appreciate that. Glees sat down, then promptly stood back up, as anxious energy propelled him now to pace in a circle. Not that I ever doubted it, especially after Tuma Hafadi declared it, but... He looked up again. Oh, Tuma, if only you could see this day. But I have a feeling you are anyway. His audience chuckled, and Hugh Glees grinned at the scout. So, where's Shem? The man's eyebrows went up. He hasn't reported in? No, he was due back for... Glees stopped, the joyous expression on his face fading into dread. What's he up to? The man shrugged. I thought he was already here, helping. Glees sat down worriedly. Oh, he's helping. Helping in ways that may prove very dangerous to him and everyone else. Oh, Shem. The older man massaged his eyes. The worst part is, someone's going to have to tell his father he's not coming home tonight. The younger man smiled sadly as Glees opened his eyes again. There was simply too much excitement in the news of the day to keep Hugh down for long. Well, nothing for it then. We have a great deal of work to do. Did you notify everyone? Yes. They'll be at your briefing this afternoon. Glees rubbed his hands in anticipation. I'll put some people to work on the findings Mrs. Brax-Hicks gave you. We need to fully understand what they think they now understand. But for now, the big question is the shins. So how will it happen? Glees's eyebrows furrowed in new worry. That's what we have to work out. It'll be like smuggling an elephant through a holy day service. How do you move something so obvious without anyone noticing? The man in model clothing frowned. I don't think you can. No, we can't, Glees agreed. There'll be a mess. We've always known there would be, and we'll have to figure out how to clean it up, too. The man sighed. Glad I'm not on the planning committee. Then again, Glees said thoughtfully, if we're the one making the mess, we'll know exactly what to clean. The man shrugged at that, not yet following his meaning. Any recommendations for me to send in the meantime? Glees rubbed his chin. They have to become quiet, very quiet. Hifadi said that's the advice your brother-in-law was hoping to deliver to them. He'll be on his way out soon. All rectors are being expelled from the world. Glees stared out the window as if he could already see Young. As I'd expect. This will be unlike anything we've ever done before. Tuma and I discussed it many times. He glanced upwards as if his old mentor sat in the rafters. There's still no other option, is there, Tuma? Hugh said to the ceiling. After all these years, it remains the only one. The man standing behind him shifted nervously. If I may ask, what's that only option? Glees watched the window again. There's no way to make the most well-known family in the world simply vanish. No, it looks like we're going to have to kill them. The man gasped. Kill them? Glees turned to him and grinned. Just like we killed Guide Pags. As Mari hung out the wash to dry in the line in the back garden, she felt someone watching her. Surely someone would be. Perrin had warned her last night that they would be under guard until Thorne lost interest, or the administrators had made a decision as to what to do next. Mari subtly looked around her to discover where the soldier may be lurking. Possibly the bushes or in the maple tree that spanned the alley behind the house. Well, she wasn't doing anything wrong. She was only hanging out the clothes. He was more than welcome to help. She chuckled miserably as she picked up the empty basket. Seeing Mrs. Hirsch in her back garden, Mari waved. But Mrs. Hirsch's eyes bulged and she rushed into her house. Mari frowned. She said. She walked back to the house and looked through the window at her neighbor. Mrs. Hirsch was carefully creeping back out, watching Mari's back porch door for movement. She said to the cat who had followed her in. I hadn't quite anticipated that. What do you think she's been told? Hearing footsteps in the back garden, Mari turned to see Pato coming up the back stairs and opened the door with a flourish. Mrs. Hirsch rushed back into her house, shielding her view of the shins. Pato didn't notice, but held out his arms wide. I've learned all that I can in the administrator's school, he announced with feigned pride. This notice, he produced an official piece of parchment from his pocket, informs you and Father that I no longer need to attend. Isn't that wonderful? He batted his eyelids. Mari pursed her lips as she took the notice dated that morning. Well, son, I couldn't be more proud of you, she said with just as much enthusiasm. It looks like you're an outcast in Edge as well. I'm sorry, Pato. Your father's at Dex. I'm sure he'll be pleased with your expulsion. He took the parchment and dropped the meaningless notice on the floor. Mother, Pato said, putting his hand on her shoulder. All I can say is, why didn't you get angry in public earlier? I'm missing only the last few weeks of school. Had you done this seasons ago, I could have been really enjoying myself. Thanks, she whispered, and gave him a quick kiss on the cheek. Now, go to Deck and Jates's and get to work, she ordered him. He started to salute her, but dropped his arm and shook his head in self-admonishment. This was going to take some time. Mari tried to feel badly about his expulsion, but she couldn't. She wondered why she had sent him to school that morning at all. Pato changed into his work clothes, ducked out the back door, smirked that Mrs. Hirsch ran back into her house again, and headed around to the front yard. He pulled the cotton bag of peach pits from his pocket and analyzed the hole his mother had hacked in the front garden. A little too close to the house, maybe, and a little too deep. Remarkable how much damage she did to the front yard with only Grandmother Pato's fancy fork. It was still lying there, bent and dirty and startled. He'd been thinking about this all evening and morning, and still wasn't sure what the peach pits meant, but maybe this was something. He dropped to his knees and poured out the 6 pits into the hole. Then, knowing that was about 5 pits too many, he fished the extras out and slipped them back into the bag. They'd go somewhere else. He just didn't know where in the world that could be, though. With the damaged fork, he scooped some of the dirt over the pit, but left a good amount of hole so his mother wouldn't know what was in there. He had no reason why not to tell her about the peach pits. It's just that, well, he didn't know much of anything about anything at all anymore, and that's why they let him leave school, he chuckled to himself on the way to the Briders' farm. Perrin and Pato left from the Briders a little before dinner time. Despite everything, Perrin was smiling. He had plans. In the mornings, he and Pato would go and help Deck with his chores in the cattle, and in the afternoons, the young men would retreat to the privacy of the barn to undergo Perrin's new training regime. The first lesson tomorrow would be how to hold a weapon as it was intended, followed by how to move faster than Perrin. He was also bringing home a gift for Mari, some of the Briders' old gardening tools. As they turned down the alley to their home, Pato murmured to his father, "Looks different than the one earlier today." Perrin nodded. As they neared the house, Perrin cleared his throat. "Well, Pato, Tomorrow we best get to work on the wasps in the maples. Last I saw, they were building a new nest about 5 branches up. They hopped over the fence and up to the back porch. Shortly after Perrin shut the door, a blue-uniformed young man fell out of the tree, frantically brushing off nothing from his clothes. In the kitchen, Perrin groaned in disappointment as he watched the panicked soldier. I was really hoping it was Thorn. Maybe next time. Perrin, you're horrible, Mari chided without meaning it. What are you holding? He grinned and held out the shovel, hoe, and rake. I understand you started to work on the front yard last night. Perhaps with all of our free time, you want to do the job properly. Mari took the tools. Maybe I do like gardening. Perrin's grin faded. There's also this, he said grimly, as he pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket. An official notice ripped from the message board closest to their home. This may explain a few things, Mari said as she took it. She glanced at the first line. Interesting take on events, though. Politics, Pato said dully. You've learned a lot about that lately, haven't you? Perrin said. Pato scoffed. More than I'd learned in school. I need to wash up. Farms are dirty places and smelly, but not as disgusting as that. He gestured to the notice before he went to the washroom. Mari sat down on a kitchen chair and read. By order of the Army of Idemia, Perrin Shin is no longer commander of the army presence in Edge. He is, for all intents and purposes, as well as according to all considerations and procedures. She paused to scowl. What does that mean? Perrin shrugged. It means that Thorn, Corey, and Genev's assistant have been practicing their Idemia speak. Mari shook her head. He is blah blah blah, a regular citizen of Edge, and is to be considered as such. She rolled her eyes. So he resigned is too few words and too accurate? He smiled painfully and shrugged again. There's more. Mari looked back at the notice, and her mouth dropped open. What does this mean? Mari Shin, despite her behavior, is also to be continued to be afforded all rights and privileges as a citizen of Edge? Well, what else would I be afforded? She gasped in panic. Perrin, why did they have to write this? He kneeled down in front of her and took her arms. Calm down, slow breaths. It means nothing. How can you say that? She panted, ignoring his advice. He pushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Deck talked to Chief Barney after we saw the notices go up. There are a few Edgers upset right now. Apparently, Perrin paused to find the right words, and she knew what was coming next would be awful. Some people went to him insisting that you should be incarcerated. Mari felt nauseated for your outburst. They thought you were debating and felt that you showed extreme disrespect to the administrators and to me. She closed her eyes and hid her face with her hands. All she could say was the phrase she repeated so often. I'm so sorry. No, there's nothing to be sorry about. You said what needed to be said. Maybe a little loudly, he cocked his head. News should have reached Idemia by now. I wish Shem was still here. I really was hoping we would hear from him before he left, but with the house being watched... What about Dak's place? Mari suggested. Couldn't he go there? Thorn has it guarded too. Another tree I may need to take down, he said more to himself. I don't know how Shem could reach us, at least not until all of this calms down a bit. Mari, he pointed to the notice. You need to continue reading. He cringed, waiting for the rest of her reaction, which would be coming in about 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2. Mari slapped the notice. What's this? During this time of adjustment for the Shin family, all residents of Edge are recommended to not interact with Perrin, Mari, or Pato Shin until all considerations and concerns have been addressed. So we have no more friends? No one who can contact us? Panicked heat welled in her chest. What concerns? When will that be? Perrin! Her shoulders heaved and the tears came in a great wave. What have I done to this family? She choked out between sobs. He pulled her head to rest on his shoulder and kissed her cheek. Before he could answer her, his son did. You've done nothing to this family, Mother, Pato said, standing at the door with fury in his pale eyes. It's them. They've ruined everything, again. His father shot him a glance of both approval and warning. And don't say you're sorry again, Mother, I know, Pato said wearily, and sat down in the other kitchen chair. So now what? The hero of Edge is to be shunned, as well as his wife and son. Any new plans, Father? Well, Perrin started slowly. Actually, yes. First, we need to make some new dreams, ones that no one here can thwart or interfere with. That will take a little time. So what we do next is, we don't worry about the notice. We don't worry about anyone or anything in Edge, except for Jatesy, Deckett, and the baby. Their farm and their family is our focus for now. I predict that by the end of planting season, we'll know exactly what we'll do next. And when we look back, we'll remember this time with fondness, because it will be the mark of the beginning of our new lives, which will be better than what we left. I promise. Nice speech, Pato smirked. So how long have you been practicing that? Actually, I was planning to use it on your mother. Did you catch all of it, Mari? She chuckled and wiped her face. Yes, I did. And I think you're right. Of course I'm right. I'm always right, Perrin insisted. Pato rolled his eyes. Always right? Absolutely, Perrin said. Now, I was also planning, after that speech to your mother, which became your speech, to do something else. Pato's eyes widened. Don't you dare! Despite his son scrambling away, Perrin caught and kissed him on the cheek. Ugh! Pato yelled, wiping his face with dramatic revulsion. Perrin chuckled. Now be grateful. On your mother, it would have been on the lips. And that's why you need to learn to be faster than me. Your attempts this afternoon were dismal. Deck's cows are quicker than you. You should have seen what was coming. How could I have seen that? Pato rubbed his cheek to make sure nothing remained. Perrin scowled. Boy, how long have you lived with me? What do I usually do with your mother in front of you? You whine about it nearly every day. I even gave you a warning. You need to learn to anticipate and prepare. You did that on the kickball field. Now do that in your life. Kick a ball at me and you'll see me anticipating and prepared. So pretend that ball is an arrow. Pato scoffed. No one can prepare for an arrow. Learn to estimate where it's coming from, its trajectory, the wind. You can. You must. We don't know who we can trust anymore. Pato sighed. All right. He stood at sloppy attention. I will subject myself to your training, sir, but on one condition. And what is that? So that I can see how to dodge the arrow appropriately, I need a demonstration. I get to shoot at you first. That evening after dinner, a subdued yet still trying to be hopeful Mari headed to Jatesy's. Yet as she stepped out into the alley, she couldn't help herself. My goodness, someone left a long knife under that bush. What would Captain Thorne think? Tisk, tisk. After she passed the bush, she ducked behind a fence and peered down the alley. A hand reached out blindly from one bush to pat the empty ground underneath another. It was amazing Perrin had so much success with those boys as he did. Her fleeting amusement came to an end as she turned to head north. She hadn't realized it, but she should have, that she was now walking to the fort. A lump filled her throat. She had no reason to go there ever again. It's not that she ever loved it, but the fort was a symbol of her husband, and now it felt like it had betrayed her by betraying him. True, he left it, but it forced him to. It took her a moment to notice that soldiers were crossing the road to avoid her. The same young men who cheerfully greeted her, tipped their caps, and even playfully saluted her at times, now ignored her. It's all right, she told herself. It's all right. They aren't our sons. They never were. They belong to the administrators. The only thing those silly men in red no longer own is Perrin. That put a smile on her face. He was his own man now, a little lost for the time being, and refusing to elaborate on his new plan just yet, but still his own man. She turned to her daughter's home and noticed the perfectly straight rows beginning to sprout. Thank goodness Jatesy and Deckett weren't on the notice. When it was time to weed this enormous farm, they'd need help. Jatesy would be busy nursing an infant. Mari could help, so could Pato and Perrin. She shook her head. Perrin weeding a farm? She laughed lightly at the idea. The one-time future High General of Idemia on his knees in a row of cucumbers. Did cucumbers even grow in rows? We have a lot to learn, don't we? She muttered as she came to her daughter's kitchen door. Deck opened the door for her. Come to get the seeds, have you? He said a little too loudly. Mari patted his arm. The soldier's in the thick bushes by the fence, probably so he can see both doors. He's out of earshot. I'm not really used to all of this, Deck apologized as he let Mari into the house. This sneaking around? Remember, Deck, you're not sneaking, she said. They are. None of us is doing anything wrong. Their jobs are incredibly dull. And if Jatesy has any rotten food that the hog won't eat, I can toss it out on my way home by the fence. Jatesy came into the kitchen holding a small basket. There's a sample of everything we had left, and in this envelope are mystery seeds from Mrs. Brighter's collection that neither of us can identify. Good, Mari said, taking the basket. It'll be a surprise. I'm rather used to surprises by now. Bring me more. Jatesy giggled. You really are behind the times, Mother. Jatesy came into the kitchen holding a small basket. There's a sample of everything we had left, and in this envelope are mystery seeds from Mrs. Brighter's collection that neither of us can identify. Good, Mari said, taking the basket. It'll be a surprise. I'm rather used to surprises by now. Bring me more. Jatesy giggled. You really are behind the times, Mother. Everyone is now Idumeaning their gardens with turf and rock, but you have now decided to plant a garden. I'm not behind the times, Jatesy. I'm just finally catching on. The Creator said we should till and plant in the world, so that's what I'm finally going to do. She peered into the basket. Deck, Jates, how do you know which side of the seeds should point up? She thought as she left their house a few minutes later, her daughter giggling so hard she had to run to relieve herself, and her son-in-law literally rolling on the floor. I don't know why they never answer that question. And that's the end of that chapter. Thank you.